because it doesn't want to connect to anything.
Shared and updated.
You know what I mean? It's like if I told my,
Recording in progress.
Okay. It is 5:07, and I will call this meeting of the Yarmouth Community and Economic Development Committee to order. It's April 28th at Yarmouth Town Hall, and we're joined by several members of the Chamber of Commerce. I will turn it to Alexis and Fiona from Barrett Planning Group to kick us off.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on the third meeting where we are hoping to kind of narrow down the three scenarios to a preferred concept. So I know you should have received the kind of the write-up of kind of notes and questions to consider for the three scenarios. I also placed at where each of you are sitting just a copy of the slide deck if you would like to follow, and then you also have an 11 by 17 map with some tracing paper, because when we get to the point where we're really kind of trying to refine and talk about ideas, if some people have thoughts about, you know, where something might make sense on the site or anything like that, we just wanted you to be able to share your doodles with us at the end. Certainly you don't have to do that. We're happy to take back the maps that are not written on, but just you have that there if it is helpful for you. So I'm just going to go over the agenda really quickly. We are going to do a little refresher of the MUC process. And since this is our third meeting, I wanted to also just talk about what's coming next, as the MUC group is going to be working with the consultant to kind of take all the input from the land use team. So I just wanted to let you know what that process will look like. And then I wanted to kind of talk about how we took the three narrowed down ideas that both groups came up with at the last meeting and just kind of fleshed out some additional notes and questions to consider in terms of, you know, if for the final write-up for the preferred scenario that will be given to MUC. We just want to make sure that all of the kind of various considerations and questions, especially when we're talking about the scale of the project, we've had a chance to talk through. So I'll be kind of following along with that as we go over each of the scenarios, and then it will be time for discussion and ultimately the recommendation of the kind of joint economic development team as to what you would like to put forward for MUC to consider at the two project scales. Then we will just take public comment as well and then go over next steps. So the meeting goal, what we're hoping to accomplish today, is that you're just narrowing down from the three scenarios to a preferred concept at two levels or as close to as possible. But I do think, you know I wasn't at the last meeting, but it seemed like from what I heard and saw that there was a lot of really great consensus and great conversation. So I think that we will get there. Next slide. Okay. So just a reminder of what you've done to date. So this is our third meeting where our focus, again, is the preferred program on two levels, so just right here. And then the kind of next step after this will be that there'll be a written draft brief proposal to MUC, and that is on us to prepare. But the whole design of the land use teams, just a reminder, your first meeting was about brainstorming all ideas, and then the second meeting that you had at the end of March was narrowing down to three ideas, and now today we are going to come up with the one proposal. So that's just kind of a reminder of where this group has been and where we are today. So just kind of going over the process, the next couple slides are going to talk about kind of the land use team phase of the process, which is where we're at right now. So the MUC group, which was appointed by the select board, and they report to the select board, they are kind of steering this process. And so there are land use teams that have been going over all of the different opportunities for the site based on their areas of expertise. So if you could go to the next slide, just to kind of show you the meetings to date, you can see economic development. The reason you had 4 meetings instead of 3, you'll recall your chamber meeting and your CEDC meeting at first were separate, and then we joined for the next meeting. So, but you can just see kind of where all the other groups are at. So recreation, they've completed their 3 meetings. Housing has completed their 3 meetings. I believe open space and water has one coming up. The schedule of meeting dates is on the project page that I'll link to in a moment. But it's just kind of helpful to see the general timeline here. Now, the MUC group they've had quite a few meetings on their own, but also have been attending a lot of the land use team meetings as well. So what comes next after we're going to come up with this scenario today? What's next? So following the kind of the land use team's work, the scenario development, so MUC and a consultant, BSC, they're going to be facilitating a multi-phase process with MUC to develop a preferred reuse scenario for the site. So I won't get into detail about that scope, but you can just, the project page has the BSC scope on it, as well as really great summaries of the work that all the different land use teams have done to date. So basically, MUC and the consultant that they're working with and the select board are going to be going through this process that is laid out on the site with all the work that the land use teams have done to date to come up with a scenario that takes into consideration all the wonderful ideas from the groups, the existing conditions of the site, and then it will go to the select board for kind of ultimate fine-tuning. So that's just, a refresher of the process and where we're at, because I realized that for the first 2 meetings, we didn't really talk so much about, well, what's going to happen after this 3rd meeting, and that's when MUC and the consultant that they're working with and staff will be taking the input from all of the land use teams to come up with some scenarios. So now we're going to just go over the concepts. So this is just kind of reviewing what you narrowed it down to last week. And this is where it might be helpful to look at kind of the more detailed write-up that goes over each scenario. I didn't want to put all of those words on slides, so I'll just kind of, speak to the slide, but also direct you to the packet you received that goes over each of the 3 scenarios. So the first scenario, a standalone indoor-outdoor sports complex. This actually lines up nicely also with ideas of the recreation land use team. So their final proposal, I believe, is on the project page now, and they talked about a sports complex at a moderate and elevated level. So the kind of takeaway we got from this group was that this would have an indoor and outdoor component, having multiple indoor gymnasiums for different types of sports, indoor turf fields, possibly rinks. I know that was some of the specifics were not fully decided, so that's something we can continue to talk about, and an aquatic center and outdoor fields. So the 2 examples that we put in the benchmarking in your packet were about 25 acres. There are certainly smaller examples, and there are larger examples. But the two that we went with for the benchmarking were about 25 acres. And just to kind of let you see roughly how that lines up on the site, you can see there what that, about how much 25 acres is. That is not at all proposing that is where the 25 acres, if you were to do that, should go, because you can see it's actually kind of crossing over into an environmentally sensitive buffer zone there. So it's really just meant to show you scale, not suggesting placement at all. I also want to apologize because I realized as I was making these slides that on the last meeting, the north arrow was not correct, so it is here, so you can, the site is skewed here on this slide. So the 2 examples that we talked about in your packet, one we'd already talked about, the Starland example, and if you had a chance to read through the packet, that also kind of can serve as a benchmarking for scenario 2, because they do also hold other types of events. I just chose to keep it here because it's primarily its function. And then for the Union Point example, which is on page 3 of your packet, that is also really interesting because that right now is just outdoor. It's not indoor-outdoor. However, in the winter, they do put domes over 2 of the fields. And then I learned between the second meeting and this meeting that there's a parcel right next to it where it's kind of cut out there that currently has an aviation museum. And that was recently acquired by Westerly Sports Center LLC. So my assumption is that that's kind of alongside the master plan for the site does detail indoor and outdoor sports facilities. So I imagine that's part of the plan there. But so right now, while it's only outdoor, I believe there are plans to expand it to indoor as well. But I think, on the first, the page there, the questions to consider, project scale. So if this is the scenario that you go with, then, remember you want to propose it at a moderate and an elevated scale. So when we get to the discussion, I can share with you what the recreation group suggested, because they, again, also went with the sports facility. And so we can kind of look and see if their ideas kind of jive with this group as well and what you were thinking. But that is a big thing, because we do want to end this meeting with whatever the scenario is, with some sense of the scale that the group would like to propose. And so the next consideration is ownership and management. So there's a lot to consider there, because in some examples that we looked at, and they weren't all in this packet, but some sports facilities are town-owned and operated, and then some are town-owned but privately operated or leased, and some are sold outright to a developer. So, for example, the Union Point, the way that site is being redeveloped is as it's in phases, and the master developer is working with the redevelopment authority to sell off parts of the property as they're being redeveloped. So then there's no more ownership, there's no more public ownership, and they're assessed as commercial use. But if it's town-owned, then that's a different consideration. It would be tax-exempt property. And so the examples that we kind of put in the bullets there, so the Hyannis Youth and Community Center, that's an example of a much smaller scale one, but it's owned and operated by the Town of Barnstable Community Services Department. And it is, so it's therefore tax exempt. And so the town established an enterprise fund to help sustain the facility, but it is also supplemented with the general fund, because the user fees alone are not enough to cover the costs. Union Point Athletics, again, that is part of a larger redevelopment master plan. So it was the lot where that is was sold to the developer for this specific purpose, and therefore the property is assessed as a commercial use. So as the site is being redeveloped, the undeveloped portions are still owned by the redevelopment authority, and that's kind of how the process will go as the site is redeveloped. I think that's a really interesting example to look at, although it is a much bigger scale. It's a 1,400 acre site. But if you go to their website, they have just such great resources to look at about how they've approached the redevelopment and have had to pivot. It's been like a decades-long process, and I think they've kind of recently pivoted, working with a new master developer. But you see how phased these types of projects are when you're having multiple uses on the site. So it is an interesting read. The next consideration here that I think the group would need to talk about is the outdoor fields and the environment. I didn't see much in the way of, from the other groups to talk about this, but, with the property is in Zone 2, so you'd be limited in the types of fertilizers that you can use, which I assume hasn't been a problem with the school, and the recreation department have been maintaining the fields. But I did also hear a conversation, about the potential for artificial turf. And I'm just not sure, from the environmental group's perspective, the open space and water, if there are concerns about that and PFAS. And so I just think that is another example of something that would be helpful for this group to talk about if you are talking about outdoor athletic fields. And then the last kind of consideration here is parking. So how much parking do comparable sites require? So on the examples that we had previously shared, parking ranges from 200 to roughly 600 parking spaces, although there are some that are much larger. And so there's an example in Fitchburg we looked at that has 1,200 parking spaces. And so, you know, the Yarmouth zoning currently generally requires 10 by 20 feet per spot. So 200 square feet per parking spot for perpendicular spaces, and with additional buffer and landscape requirements for parking lots over 20. So, you know, how much of the property is that going to take up? It is worth noting in the examples that we gave, like for this Starland and Union Point, that 25 acres does include parking. But again, it's just another thing to kind of think about is how much parking would be on the site depending on the scale and how much of the impervious surface is that going to create, and is there an appetite for a parking garage or shuttle services? I heard that the, you know, there's also talk about the ferry parking needs. So is there an opportunity for collaboration with shuttle services and parking and things like that? So when we do the discussion, it will be after we've kind of gone over all three, but does anyone have any comments or questions that they just wanted to raise about any of those questions to consider before we look at the second scenario?
Did the Union Point project start with a master developer?
You know, that's a great question. It's been going on for, like I said, at least 2 decades. So I'm not sure that when I was looking at the site for the project, it appears that they recently pivoted, like within the last couple of years. And so I'm not sure what the history was, if it stalled, why it was stagnant. So that's a good question.
I can answer that. I was the first executive director for the Southfield Redevelopment Authority.
Okay.
So it was always set up that way by legislation, that there would be this, they created a redevelopment authority, but they would hire then a master planner. And then as the property became ready for development, they would turn it over to the master planner. The sports facility is really one of the first projects that really got some traction up there and made it and has been successful. They've had major problems with the prior master developers, basically embezzling money and stuff like that, and they had to fire them and let them go. So it's been a big delay. They actually have Brookfield in there now, which is a big international developer, and they seem to be well capitalized. The site's also limited because it doesn't have any water or sewer that's public, so that's really what's been holding back a lot of the specific development of the 1,400 acres. But this parcel in particular has been the most successful part of the project to date.
So that is, that's interesting. Yeah, it did look like that the master developer that they're working with now, they have a kind of a public presentation that they've done on the site, and you know, they've done a lot of similar redevelopment projects, it looks like. So I guess lesson learned there is, you know, working with a very experienced developers going to pay off. But do you know, because I noticed adjacent to where the sports facility is, it appears there's like a single family residential neighborhood.
Yes.
Does that precede the sports complex, do you know?
No, that was actually built probably 7 years ago,
Oh, okay. And
Yeah.
so it's part of the redevelopment of the.
part of the redevelopment.
Oh, very cool.
Okay.
Do you know, sorry to put you on the spot. Was residential the first redevelopment, the first
Yes.
part of, okay.
Yeah, and they've got a good deal of residential development that's been developed up there initially, and then, but the only commercial development to date, really, other than some mixed-use retail, has been the sports facility.
Okay, cool. All right, thank you. All right, so then scenario 2, if you want to go to the next slide. So sports complex with event and performance space. And so the 2 examples that we gave on this seem very different, but we did that on purpose. And so the first example, 4 Kicks in Taunton, which we had shared before. And a lot of these sports facilities seem to also advertise as, hey, do you want to host your event here? But it seemed like on 4 Kicks site in particular, that was a really big thing that they were marketing. I don't know how often they do rent out their facility, but it did seem like they really were trying to kind of recruit that use as well. And so that's why I wanted to highlight it here. And the size is not huge, so it's about 5,500 square feet of function space, and they say that they have these movable partition walls, so you can configure the space. And that's actually like what a lot of the larger convention centers do as well. You can reconfigure the space depending on a vendor's needs for the type of event they're holding, but this is just at a much smaller scale. So they talk about accommodating events from 25 to over 300. So again, it's not huge, but I understand, Yarmouth is lacking a lot of meeting space as is. So, just having maybe the ability to have slightly larger events. But they do host, they say they host corporate team building, trade shows, banquets, bar and bat mitzvahs, fundraisers, graduation and prom overnights, so all sorts of things. And then the other example, I did keep in the Mass Mutual Center, and the reason is, first of all, it's very small. The site that it's on is 5 acres. And then they're currently in the process of acquiring, I think it's about maybe 2.5 acres on an adjoining parcel to redevelop a parking garage. Because right now, Mass Mutual Center has no parking. It's probably partly why it's able to be so small, but they are working to redevelop the parking garage adjacent to create some parking spaces, 800 to 900, I believe. But what I thought was interesting about this is they, in addition to having the kind of typical convention space, meeting space, they have an arena, which is predominantly used for sports, ice, for hockey and basketball, but they also hold concerts and performances. So it does have that performance capability. They also have an exhibit hall and a ballroom and meeting rooms. So it is. What seems a little bit different about this, though, is something like this would not be able to necessarily accommodate practice. It's more about for performances. But still, I thought it was an interesting example, because as a convention center that also really does it has the ability to hold regular sporting events, performances, et cetera, because it has that arena as a part of it. And it would be really interesting to know, and one of the questions that we have is talking about the types and scale of events and what the market is. It'd be really interesting to know what really is kind of the bread and butter for Mass Mutual Center. Is it conventions, or I have to imagine it's probably the use of the arena, but I'm not sure, just speculation. But having that performance and sporting space, I think probably is very helpful. But either way, so again, those two examples are very different. But, one thing that I think we want to kind of help you tease out here, because it's going to be important to talk about the site itself, is what types of events are we talking, and at what scale? Because that's really going to affect kind of the size of the building itself, how much parking is necessary. And then, so what is the market, year-round, seasonal, for these different types of events? I know the first meeting with the chamber, we talked a lot about how just huge demand for space for tournaments and league practice and things like that. But the other types of events that also came up, performances, trade shows, and so on, I think it's just helpful understanding what is the market demand, and how's that going to affect how much, what the project scale ultimately needs to be. So the questions other questions to consider here, a lot of it just kind of repeats what we asked you to consider for the first one. Again, that project scale. There's a huge range in the examples that we looked at, from around 10 acres to 55 acres. And again, just keeping in mind that about 35 acres, or about half of the site, is disturbed in some way already. And then, so again, types of events, market demand. So some sports facilities that we shared are able to accommodate larger non-sports events. And, I don't know enough to really be able to guide you on this. I'd love to hear from the group about, again, that market demand, and what sorts of things what are the vendors looking for? Especially for parking, flexibility of the building to be able to be reconfigured. Convention centers, they often include multiple options for breaking up those larger event spaces. And then again, what is the overall market for the types of events? So, I shared an example on this about how that Wicked Gluten Expo that I learned was at Starland. Well, they subsequently have moved to a facility in Fitchburg that has way more parking, have 1,200 parking spaces. So it may just be that they like to move around and find different places in the state to go. They actually have events all over New England, but in Massachusetts, they moved around. So, it'd be interesting to know what made you move. I know that Starland doesn't even have close to 1,200 parking spaces. So it's just, again, hearing from the vendors that you want to draw, that'd be interested in utilizing the space, understanding kind of what they're looking for. And then, again, with the ownership and management, it's going to have a different feel depending on what you're talking about there. So the convention centers that we had shared previously, a couple examples owned by the Mass Convention Center Authority, and they are tax exempt. And so are there examples of sports complexes that perform both functions, acting as a sports venue, but also event space, and having that flexibility, that are municipally owned, that have that scale? And then, so again, just kind of looking at some of the ideas that have been talked about with ownership. So for the Mass Convention Center Authority, what is that? How does the town facilitate a partnership with them if desired? I'm asking, I don't know. So it's just questions that, the town and the group would want to consider. And so again, with it being tax exempt, is there still enough of an economic and fiscal benefit to the town that the tax exempt status would not be kind of a turnoff, because you're still drawing so many people to the community who are going to be frequenting your local businesses? So, because I know we had heard in the first couple of meetings, kind of a thought that, a hope that this would bring in revenue. Well, if it's tax exempt, it still is going to have an economic benefit and a community benefit, but, what is the fiscal benefit going to look like? Looking at, so that's MCCA examples. Municipally owned, again, those tend to be smaller, so there are other examples. We'll talk about this when we get to like cultural spaces as well. But when these facilities are town-owned, they're often not, that I have seen, at a scale enough to support much larger conventions and events. So like the HYCC, they have meeting space. They can accommodate meetings and events and whatnot. But I think the appetite for some of the larger events that I heard, at least in the first couple of meetings, I'm not sure of examples of municipally owned properties that would be able to kind of sustain those. And then you have privately owned. So some examples of those sporting complexes, they have hosted larger non-sporting events. So again, it has a very different feel. When you go to a community center with athletic space and space for practices and tournaments and whatnot, it is a different feel than a privately owned, center. And so, what is it that the group is looking for? What are they talking about? And then again, also considering the parking, someone, I think it was in the CEDC, talked about having a potential for a shuttle, which I thought could be a really cool way to address the potential parking deficit. If you are talking about larger events, is there a way to organize some sort of shuttle services on an as-needed basis to kind of alleviate some of that parking pressure? So for scenario 2, with a sports complex with event and performance space, does anyone have any questions or comments about those bullets or notes?
Just, Karen, I need a mic for a second.
And we'll zip to the last one super fast and let you discuss.
Bill Scott, Assistant Town Administrator. I think one of the things we want to look at is if it's a larger facility, it'd be most likely a private developer. And if it's a private developer, they're going to determine the market in terms of, we're not going to say, why don't you do basketball, when their market analysis shows it should be something else, or sports versus event center. I think it's important that people understand that, yes, here's the things we're looking at, but private sector driven facility has to make bank, as it were, so they're going to determine what's going to work for them. And then within that context, how does that work for the community? And as you go down to, let's say, the Hyannis example, that becomes purely a sort of a local decision. And how much money can we make off of that outside of the community uses? So I think there's a lot of decisions to be made, but the market's going to decide on the bigger ones, what direction to go. Thanks.
Thank you. So one thing I noticed with the Union Point redevelopment process, part of their development team, and I'm not sure, if this was a requirement of the redevelopment authority or how this came about, but they do, I think, as they were developing that master plan, there was some economic, various types of impact were assessed, and they did look at, economic impact, fiscal impact, and other sorts of things to kind of, I'm not sure how that shaped the decision-making about the ultimate master plan for the site. But at some point, that may be, not for this part necessarily, this is more about, visioning and whatnot, but that is a consideration, I think, that can really influence the feel of the facility. So the final scenario is just the mixed-use development. I realized I didn't really capture the village idea in the packet, so I did want to kind of highlight that because I think that is kind of how people talked about it, that it would be more of almost like a community, kind of a village, walkable neighborhood feel. And so this scenario, if I understood it correctly, was to redevelop the site into a walkable village that included a variety of harmonious uses, including recreation, retail, cultural and creative spaces, and housing. And the project would likely require phasing. Again, the Union Point example, much larger scale, but that is the redevelopment of a site into kind of I think the ultimate hope is kind of self-contained. There would be a lot of commercial uses, residential uses, and so on the site. And that's going to come in phases. So I was curious if the residential came first in the Union Point, because that's the type of thing, as if the town chooses to do like a mixed use, kind of feel for the site, how is that going to affect the phasing? What's going to come first? What's the scale going to be? All those sorts of things, again, to kind of consider. So if this is the chosen scenario, we've talked about project scale for all of them, but it's also, you almost have to think of the scale of all the components within it. So it's the overall project scale, but now if you want to have a sports facility on a 70-acre site that has other uses, well, you're probably going to have to talk about a smaller scale now. So it's about the overall scale, but also the individual components and kind of that compromise to make everything, harmonious on the site. And the phasing, what would that look like? Again, the ownership and management, for this I focused on the community-oriented spaces because, again, if you have a mixed-use site with, community spaces, recreational facilities, that sort of thing, they may be at a smaller scale, and that is more in line with some of the municipally owned examples that we saw on Cape for both sports and recreation, but also for cultural centers. I think whether the town is owning and operating or owning and leasing the community-oriented spaces, or whether it's all handled through private development, that is another piece of the puzzle. And again, because now we're talking about, for some of these community spaces, community uses at a smaller scale, is there still an appetite to have conversation about reuse of portions of the existing school? Also, what housing types are you talking about? What commercial uses are you looking for on the site? I know that the groups did talk about things that would kind of, be harmonious together. So if you have retail, dining, things like that the people who are living there would use, but also that would benefit the community as well. One thing that I wish I had added here that kind of jumped out in my head from the first meeting with the CEDC, I wish I could remember which member raised this, but that another consideration, if you're looking to do something like this, a lot of the village centers that people know and love, like the example, I included Mashpee Commons, they organically developed, and they're in, this is not quite the same. You're talking about a site that currently has educational uses on it and is, not in a heavily trafficked area. So it's not quite the same as a lot of the kind of beloved village centers and downtowns that people talk about. So in the first CEDC meeting, I remember one of the members talking about, well, maybe we need to look more broadly at zoning in general around the area, and how are you really going to kind of connect this with to make it make sense as a kind of a center that people would go to. So that's kind of another consideration there. And we just Mashpee Commons we kept in as the example, just 40 acres. It's only a little bit more than how much of the site is currently disturbed. But the other kind of cool thing about this example is that it's almost bringing in a lot of the ideas that the other land use teams have talked about as well. So, the recreation, the housing team, they actually, their scenario favored mixed use with commercial. And so being able to kind of bring in these different ideas that other land use teams have already been talking about as well. So those are the scenarios as we heard them. And if you could go to the next slide. So how we wanted to kind of facilitate discussion here. We don't have to take 10 to 15 minutes. It can be 5 minutes. It can be however much time you need. But we thought it might be helpful for you to just kind of be able to digest all of that. And if you wanted to, jot any ideas down, whether on the map or even just in note form, so that when we have the discussion, you're ready to share out. But the questions that we're going to be asking, essentially, when we go around, is just, of those scenarios, 1 through 3, how would you rank them? And we'll go around, and we want to kind of hear what your reasoning is, any additional thoughts or concerns that you have, and at what scales. Do you have an estimated number of housing units or a building size for a sports complex, or how many outdoor fields are you talking about? Just give us a sense of what that scale would look like. So that's what we're going to be asking you to do, but we just wanted to give you, 5-10 minutes maybe to digest, ask questions, talk to each other, doodle, and then we'll just go around and have that roundtable discussion. Yeah?
There's a piece right here that's got a red circle around it, and that looks like unusable.
Yes.
So we shouldn't be drawing something on top of that.
Yeah, so that's wetlands, yes.
Okay, thank you. That was it. Looks like there's a large
You can have mine.
field there.
So,
Absolutely. I'll help Mike.
and
I just wanted to
Oh, well, you're supposed to draw on it.
the piece that,
don't give me
Do we have more?
Emmy Smalls,
There's one here if you want it.
that's up in the air, that the existing agreement with the solar panels would have to shift as well. Yes, yeah, and so, if solar is an example of something that's on the site,
Clearly, but you've got to have constraints of
scenarios.
what
I just know
amenities do
that
you
these
want in the
particular
building.
panels are
How many
tied to.
basketball courts or tennis courts and all this other stuff that you want. This is way cart before the horse. Where does it fit? Where are the setbacks? Where do you put the parking?
Yep.
How do you get the water lines? All the things, utilities. So, do something here.
This is just.
You gotta pick an identity. What do you want it to be? I have with the third one, there's too many identities. Happens.
So what do you think it should be?
Come in conflict with.
Do you want your ball fields here?
Of course.
You done? It's not decided,
Or I can set up.
the
Okay, but
thing.
just like,
So you want all
What
outdoor
if we like
fields?
this idea?
The fields get mixed.
yes.
Arm wrestle.
So they can coexist with soccer fields or
Exactly.
whatever.
Because we're not
Would
going
you
to play
use-
baseball every day.
Could you play ball
We're missing
You can then take
under a bubble?
into here and dig down
Climate
in.
controlled enough.
Yeah.
So right now, we go to Bridgewater.
Okay.
There's a place called the Dome.
Let you do it.
Do a place that's got
Have an
soccer fields, 2 soccer fields, and
Whatever
it's
the
got
identity is,
half of a baseball field.
doesn't work.
In other words, got a full diamond for the infield,
Look at a
and it
geology
has half
report.
of an outfield.
Mine, it was over at the library,
Well enough, you'll hit it off the back wall.
very much at all.
Have you done that?
Yes, that's what I
Many
do.
times, both righty and lefty.
Not like, I wish I was that good.
There's a little cluster.
Some of this has to include the
Sure.
Been around 50 days.
But even on the
No,
cemetery,
Or is it all?
to look to other places.
Some of it for,
hanger on. You would think it's from the 50s.
But,
Lighting
so
is-
that's it?
Touch the third rail and say,
dual lanes, so you can,
Doesn't actually have
some of
it.
the traffic
Yeah,
up there.
so this,
They're not gonna like that.
it used to be this
area with
fire or something, or maybe snow.
There's a,
cars coming in and out.
I think that's assuming there's going to be housing.
Right, it goes off the ceiling.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying.
It is.
That's a good idea.
Better
I
than
think it's an idea that we've listed here.
No, I agree with
No,
you.
no, no, but I'm
Bring
just
this
saying,
in.
that the idea of having any housing, even with commercial,
I've mentioned it to Mary, that we go off
I
Cape,
understand. I get
mean, you
it.
have to-
All I'm saying is, my
losing
point is,
revenue, because
Yeah, well,
people
you
go
are.
off Cape.
I wonder,
they go, fine.
What I've said is,
Well, it's-
we need
it's
an indoor
Not just
facility
up to any two
that
of us
has
or one
enough
of us, it's up to all of us,
flexibility
but I
to
think the
move
three scenarios
walls
we're
or
looking
move
at,
nets,
Yeah?
none of
that
them
we
are
can
saying
do
what
indoor
housing
soccer and we can do indoor softball.
I was the one that was saying that without,
And field hockey.
I was saying that who's working at every
Everything.
Exactly, all
we
that
already can't
multi-use,
build our current businesses. And half of them are only working because we took
water.
That's good. I mean, you either like go
which isn't
pickleball or
a long-term.
Maybe pickleball goes in a dome that's winter only.
I'm not sure where.
Could be in a dome
That's
too,
not a
but
bad idea. But I don't know if Dave bought it.
I don't know what I would
I mean,
I think that, I love that studio or union, whatever it is.
Entire process is
idea.
cart before the horse.
when I would see a big multi-purpose
something,
We
building,
don't know what the use is.
there's all sorts of options to break it off.
Yeah, yeah.
You have event space built in
You can
when you want
configure it
it.
how you want.
Exactly.
I'm glad Bill
Out
finally
here,
said it, 'cause
you've
my
got
issue is
2 baseball fields,
say we want anything at
baseball
a scale
field,
that's
so it's
private.
90-foot bases.
No, if we want to private.
Conversation.
Wants it, you
because
have other
we're not
bases
gonna get
here
to
at
pick what they do.
Okay.
90 feet.
You could try to have some influence.
Doesn't compromise the kind of competitive quality.
No, it's not everywhere. As long as you have a 300-foot fence,
Carve out some things like
300 feet.
has to be available for town recreational services, things like, you can't overburden it with criteria, because no one will bite at it, but if you give someone the opportunity
If we
to
could come
develop
together in like a minute or two, just to make sure we,
little
everyone has
kids
time to share their
participate
ideas.
in town as part of the town rec, you wouldn't want that.
so out here you also
They're doing
have,
the
It's hammered in the community. So the town, to Bill's point, has some
outfield so that people don't run into
the
it.
RFP process of
oh, it's called a warning track.
Yes, a warning track. And a something eye.
the thing you gotta look at is what's the town's appetite to spend. So it's
I mean, that's a safety thing.
we're spending $208 million
That's not a big deal.
right now, and that's driving people crazy.
Asking for a lot.
There's that other piece of it is
Very presumptuous.
you got to go to town meeting, and town meeting is its own animal. Okay, but anyway.
And we could all say whatever we want in the muck.
I have the warrant right here. Is it in the warrant?
Do something totally different. This whole thing is a crazy process. We've gotten no community input. Am I okay to sit here?
Yeah, yep. Okay.
I should bring it down here, you can see everything around it.
Okay, so, if we could, kind of come back
Red Sox,
to
62,000.
the group here. The first thing that I just wanted to ask, so again, we took the scenarios that the group narrowed things down to at the last meeting, but we understand, and we want to make sure it's, we're all on the same page, that the scenario that this group walks away with as wanting to present, it may not be one of those exact scenarios. You may tweak it and have thoughts. So the first thing that I wanted to ask is there anybody who wants to kind of propose a modification to any of those scenarios, or offer a different idea altogether? Because we're going to just go around and say, what of the scenarios, what your kind of, how you would order them and why. So before we do that, though, I just want to make sure we're kind of all on the same page with the scenarios, which are the standalone indoor-outdoor sports complex, which aligns with the recreation group. Scenario 2, sports complex with event and performance space. And then the scenario 3, the mixed-use village, which would have all sorts of complementary uses for the redevelopment of the site. So those are the three that, we are assuming when we ask you about the ranking. But does anyone have kind of, stipulation or an additional scenario that they kind of wanted to bring forward before we go around and discuss?
How about a combination?
Combination is, yeah, definitely, we want to hear that. So do you, why don't we, when we get to your turn, why don't you tell us about how you would combine it unless, actually, what is it, why don't you tell us now in case anyone else has the same thing? That might be an idea.
Of the three, I like 2 because it's small, manageable, but I think it needs the support of a mixed-use development. Something like 3.
Okay. Okay. So in the way that you're talking about 3, the sports and events center, I mean, it would likely have to be at kind of a smaller scale to accommodate those other uses.
Right,
But,
commercial
yeah.
uses, something commercial to support the indoor recreation use.
Gotcha. Okay.
Detached, because again, there's not a lot of commercial in that area.
Right.
Support it, so I think it's part of that sort of plan as well,
Okay.
heading down Higgins Kroll towards our
Yeah.
next pocket of commercial use, something that's going to maybe incorporate, that's my thoughts.
Okay. All right.
Can you give an example, Peter, what you're thinking?
Well, I think 1 is tough. I think 1, we don't know how many acres we're gonna have left over once the town, the school takes what they need to do whatever we don't know about at another committee. But so we have some land left. I think it's gotta be a private developer. I don't think the town can take care of something this size. And so something like 4 Kicks seems more manageable. And a project maybe the town can get out of it what it needs, maybe suggesting to a developer, because it would be private. But I'd like to see something where if you're dropping your kids off, maybe you stay in the area and you go to a store or shop, or maybe there's a place you can go other than the venue, other than the, where the sports are happening, to hook up your laptop and do something else. So something like that, I guess, is what I'm thinking.
Okay.
And I just came up with this idea talking to Jack, so I don't know.
That's great.
Thank you. All right. So as we go around, if you don't mind saying your name, I know I see your name tags, but there's some that are, I think, got a little closer. Yeah, so I just want to make sure we're.
You are today.
Here's Slovak.
Okay, thank you. And then Paul, yeah. So you are, okay, so Alan is not here then?
Yeah.
All right. So, if anybody wants to, bring, hand over or come up and show kind of what you're talking about, if you are kind of feeling particular about locations or particular uses on the site, you can bring that up here and kind of talk through that as well. But let's just go around and we're just going to ask, starting with Peter, of those 3 ideas, how would you kind of rank them? And are there any kind of particular considerations, much like Peter shared there with, kind of specifics that you'd want to see on the site?
I would rank them scenario 3, scenario 2, scenario 1, but I think a combination like you were suggesting of 3 and 2 is probably the way to go, and you could even throw in some of these fields for rental. What we heard was a lot of people would like to have free practice fields, and that costs the town a lot of money, and I can't see that being something we'd want to do. But rented practice fields worked very well a couple of places I've lived. So, but I just don't think a sports complex alone is going to cut it. So I think you're right. It's going to be a sports complex as part of a two, and then shops and stuff would be very nice. Mashpee Commons appeals to me a lot. Thank you. Is that what you look for?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Joe Gibbs. I mean, originally I was going more along the two line, but there needs to be some sort of way to support this. So I do like Peter's idea of adding some retail in there, as well as that's kind of an island, an island there of not really having anything like that. As well as, right, drop the kids off to do the sports and go, and I was kind of, when he brought it up, almost like that book store atmosphere where at the coffee shop you can hook up the internet and
Yeah.
and do some shopping and that type of stuff. So I think just supporting this, I think that's just a big take, and as far as a standalone complex, that would probably be something that we'd have to go with a private partnership. And then a lot of this is gonna be really what they're gonna come up with. I don't know how much, well, we can put some fences on it, or some boundaries on it, but I think that a private partnership's gonna wanna do what they're gonna wanna do. Like somebody brought up, is basketball the big thing? Is it pickleball? Like what, if it's gonna be a sports complex, the market's really gonna drive, what makes sense for a private entity to do that. I think even, and I just honestly don't know what that demand is now. I think we definitely need more recreation spaces. We definitely need more event spaces. It would be nice to have, the Cape is kind of missing that convention area, but I guess just how do you support it? And it goes back, I go back to, should the town operate it? Should the public operate it? Should the town own the land and maybe lease, do the 100-year lease to land? I mean, what makes the most sense? I wish I had a better idea, but I think whatever it is, we do need the event space, we do need recreation space, but how does anybody sustain that, whether it's public or private, I guess?
Okay. And I'm sorry, Peter, I also should have asked this. I mean, for either of you, do you have any kind of specifics about scale for any of the elements? How many housing units make sense, or how large would the sports complex be? How many outdoor fields? And do you have any kind of strong feeling about scale, or?
Not really. I'm still thinking about what, not how big or how much.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Paul?
Yeah, I like options 1 and 2, although I think they could be combined. I think you could have the event space in the same sort of physical location, larger building. Had a chance last week to go out to Game On out in Fitchburg, and they have a 90-acre site out there. Only 26 acres has been developed to date, and so they have 1,200 parking spaces on there. They have a 120,000 square foot indoor facility that has 10 high school basketball courts inside of it, and they also have 7 soccer fields on the exterior, just to give a sense of how much you can put on 26 acres. They're sold out 45 weekends out of the 52, and on average, they bring between 2,000 and 3,000 people there every weekend that they're open. They also charge for parking, so it's $10 a seat, so they make $30,000, $40,000 on parking on the weekend. They're all played towards tournaments, so there's such a need for tournament space out there. And so their slow season is actually our busy season.
Okay.
The tournament stuff sort of slows down in the summer, but it's really busy the rest of the year. The inside of that facility, also had a chance to visit Longplex in Tiverton, Rhode Island, which is a big indoor facility. They've got 2 indoor soccer fields, 5 basketball courts, and an indoor rink. That it's not ice yet, but they're building a separate building to put it in.
Like a roller rink?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
So that's 120,000 square feet as well. All of them have retail components to them, with restaurants, retail space. Longplex has a gym inside of it, and on the 3rd level, they have a 1/4-mile walking track up there. So that really is open to the community. So we were there during the day, and there were a lot of members of the community that were in there using that facility. It's almost set up like they create an indoor Main Street, because you've got so many parents that are coming there with their kids. So the parents can take a day pass and work out in the gym, or they can shop, or they can hook up to Wi-Fi in the restaurant areas. They can watch closed circuit TV to watch their kids do the stuff. So both of those facilities do a really nice job. They're both profitable enough that they continue to develop. You know, the Game On out in Fitchburg is looking to develop another 20 acres of the 90 acres that they have. Longplex is looking to add another building with a hockey rink and pickleball courts. So those business plans seem to be pretty solid just on the sporting side. And the event space as well. I mean, there's a number of events there, but golf shows, boat shows. A lot of these places do dog shows, sort of dance competition kind of stuff. They're really pretty good at sort of filling the place up. Both of them also had sports rehab facilities that were located inside. So I think that, given the site, I mean, if you've got 26 acres of developable land, that's the kind of facility you could do with parking on site. I think shuttles also make sense. I think the real sort of economic benefit from this facility is going to be how it lights up other businesses in town, rather than just the particular tax revenue that you may or may not take from a facility like this. I mean, I'm also a huge fan of mixed-use development, you know, but I spent a lot of time going around the Cape when I was with the Cape Cod Commission, asking people, what do you want your Main Street to look like? You know, and they're like, oh, we want it to look like Chatham or Provincetown. I'm like, well, you're not zoned for that. You couldn't rebuild that here if you wanted to. So the number of zoning changes you would need, and like Mashpee Commons is more than 30 years old.
Right.
You know, it's taken them that long, and they've had to fight, had opportunity to work with them as well. And they've been fighting tooth and nail to try to get additional housing units put in there. And they've only been able to do it by the 40B process. And that was, you know, they were looking at 1,000 units. And generally, in the parlance of sort of economic development, you know, retail follows residential, but you generally need about 2,000 people in a walkable space before you get the kind of retail development that you'd be looking for. So the length of time associated with that development, the cost, still questions of ownership, you know, who's going to come in and commit to that long term. I mean, you've got the Chase family committed in Mashpee Commons, but that's sort of a labor of love for them. So those kind of mixed use facilities are really difficult to do. But I will say, both at Game On and Fitchburg, as well as Four Kicks and some of them, there's residential activity right next to these units. And Union Point as well, and a lot of it is new. So that kind of use on that property is not inconsistent with residential development, but that really sort of master planned mixed use is really hard to do.
Okay.
Ask Paul a question. The retail that's at the Long Pond, or whatever it was called, Longplex, what did they have?
They had sort of one of them is a shoe store. They've got 2 arcades. They've got a restaurant. They've got a gym. They've got jiu-jitsu clubs. They've got a CPR training facility. They've got a rehab unit in there. I mean, it's pretty multifaceted. But it's designed to really, if you've got a couple thousand parents there every weekend, then retail can work. But it has to be retail that's targeted towards that audience.
Complete.
Yeah.
Neat.
Paul, what was the context in terms of community? I'm sorry. Like, is there a mall somewhere else nearby, a downtown?
Not out in Fitchburg.
All right.
That's, you know, Fitchburg's pretty far away. It's like Nova Scotia. You can see Wachusett Mountain.
No, I know.
Is there a mall in Leominster?
I'm just saying that you can encapsulate all those things in that center because there's no market there's nobody else outside that.
And like Yarmouth is a unique community, and you don't have really that kind of defined Main Street that
Right.
you'd find in other places. This potentially becomes one of those, a community function of this kind of facility, especially because it's available for like seniors that want to walk the walking track in the winter. And so I thought it was a unique business model that could really work here.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Is there like area hotels to host all those families for the, for all the weekend sport tournaments, or?
There are some hotels, but there are not enough for those. And those are the weekend tournaments, you know. Some of the tournaments that they don't take are the sort of week-long tournaments where you have the people that are playing the sports and their parents that are staying. I think in part because they don't have the hotel space to accommodate that.
Can I ask a question just for purposes of, documenting the scenario? So if, because it's a 70-acre site, and it sounds like, for your ranking, the focus should be the sports complex. It's great if it can accommodate events. If that does not take up the entire site, and the town still has control of other, the remainder of the site, whatever that may be, do you, because you mentioned residential, I'm just wondering if you see other room for potential, other uses, maybe that's not worked out right now, but that the town is preserving part of the site, or no?
Yeah, I think residential is consistent with these facilities. Certainly, there's been new residential built next to some of these newer facilities. Game On in Fitchburg was built in 2018, and Longplex was in 2019. Those are two newer facilities. I think part of the reason some people are migrating from Starland, which is a much older facility, to those facilities, because they're newer.
Yeah.
And they're laid out that way. Residential construction seems to be consistent with the use there. So I think that's a potential, look, I think even the Emmy Small School, to the extent that might become available for redevelopment for residential purposes, would fit, the overall plan.
Okay, thank you. Alan?
Oh, it's Jack.
Jack, I'm sorry.
No problem.
Let me change that.
So
I did that wrong, sorry.
I like both 1 and 2, but I think to make it financially successful, 2 is probably a better option. Having the meeting and conference space or performance space gives you another source of income to keep the building going. Like Paul said, they do well with the tournaments on the weekends, but you got 4 or 5 other days a week that you've got to do something with the property. And so that gives you an option to fill some of that space. And again, I think having some of the retail component in the building may work better than having outside. Again, when you have all of those people there, if you can cater to them, you can do pretty well with them.
Do you have any thoughts on scale?
I think you want to make it, I think bigger is better than smaller. There are not a lot of places on the Cape you can do this. If we're going to do it, you want to draw from everywhere. You need big enough scale to make it a draw.
Okay.
And I think on the conference space as well, if you can have some of the, again, you were talking about the air walls and the movable walls and everything. If you can have it so that right now, we don't have any place on the Cape that you can do a real big conference or a big trade show. And years ago, we looked at it, in downtown Hyannis, that didn't get the support. Back then, the Convention Bureau was going to give us a pot of money, but they couldn't, it needed tax revenue to support it. And that didn't happen. But I think there's a demand for bigger conferences and bigger trade show type of things on the Cape, and the space isn't there.
Okay. All right, thank you. So Peter, I know you had shared a little bit earlier about kind of a combination. Did you want to add anything, or?
I mean, I just think, we need to consider the demographics as well, Hanover, Pittsburgh, the immediate population and access to those areas. We're the oldest by median age county. in Massachusetts. We have declining student population. So I just think there's some concern with being, or a scenario one that may or may not support it.
Okay. So sports only, but openness to sports and other, as part of the mixed use, okay. Do you have any thoughts on scale, especially given that I think it sounds like you want to see 2 kind of integrated in 3?
I don't know.
Okay,
I don't know what we'll have left to use.
okay. Thank you. Jamie?
So I'm in support of scenario 2, and I don't want to repeat what Paul and Jack said in the interest of time. I think they've covered it. My concern with scenario 3 is not so much opposed to the idea of mixed-use development per se, but I'm somewhat troubled by a recent cautionary tale in Brewster. Brewster acquired the Seacamps property and put a committee like this together to come up with a list of uses for the property. The list of things in the universe of uses that are not on that list is smaller than the uses that are on the list. That is, they added everything conceivable to meet everyone's special interests, I'll use that term. And you've already seen conflict because they went to the town meeting to get money to do one thing, and some folks says, no, that was too much for what you want to do there, because what about the other interest over here? It just creates a problem where now nothing gets done. So this should have a singular identity that works, and I think the combination combined in scenario 2 does that in the best way possible economically, but also just in terms of feasibility of getting things done. If you have to go to town meeting to get things done, town meeting, as we all know, can be problematic. If you have multiple facets of things that people can do, they're just going to infight. That's not disrespectful, it's just what it is. But if you have a singular purpose, I think you have a better opportunity of maximizing the use of this space.
So as we go around, I just want to encourage participants, because we've had the opportunity to hear from others who've spoken before you. I really want to know if there is something that you favor, if you really favor 1 or 2, when we talk about scale, if there is also an appetite for, if there's a moderate scale or a smaller scale, again, even if it's just preserving part of the site for some undetermined use. In my mind, that's distinct from scenario 3, because scenario 3 is really a master planned mixed-use village idea, whereas that's kind of different from having kind of a singular identity of, we want to create this sports and events and performance space, and we are fine with it not taking up the whole site. So it's a bit different. It's almost like you still might have mixed uses on the site, but not in that mixed-use village way that's in number 3. So I think that's another thing that would be helpful to kind of hear about, because I'm not sure that I'm hearing opposition to that, especially because I think we're kind of, non-specific on scale at this point, because there's just so many unknowns. So let's see, Danielle.
I think that while 1 or 2, if done really well, could have a really good impact, I think we're going to have very little say in it being done the way we're discussing. That at the scale we want it done, it's private. I don't know why we can sit here and say, I'm so excited because, the seniors can have a walking path, which I think would be fantastic. Or we can say that the kids will be able to practice their sports, and that'll be great because whatever. But I think that the only way this is done well, right, that we get the economic value out of it, because anything that's we own is tax exempt, and that doesn't super help us in terms of money, is going to be something we don't have any say over. We have obviously some mild constraints, but not really. And so I just, while I like the ideas, I have a lot of concerns about them. And I also think that if we're talking about the town of Yarmouth, like, I think we all, like, people have real concerns over, like, that they have vocalized for this town, right? They don't have housing. How much of who's working this center, right? Because they're not living in the town. And so I think that if we're talking about things that the people in this town are really concerned about, a sports complex done really well could alleviate some of that because it would give us the tax money. I'm not disagreeing with that. But I do have concerns that doing something that's 1 or 2 is going to be not in the interest of the everyday lives of the people that are here. I think that what Paul was saying, where there's all sorts of other things happening with it, could be really cool. I really like that idea, but those are my concerns.
Thank you. Now, this is a question that I don't know the answer to, but I'm wondering if maybe someone else does. Because this is town-owned, I mean, through the disposition, I know with housing, how it works is that through the land disposition process, I mean, there is an agreement. It doesn't, necessarily mean everything's going to go the way you want it. But it is, a bit different than something that is privately owned at the outset. So I think through the procurement process, there'd be a bit of.
We would have some constraints. We would
That's
be
if
able
we decided to do an RFP to keep it within the town. If the town decides they want to privately run sports complex, then we sell the land or whatever. Like, that's a whole different scenario I think that we're talking about. And I think that's what Danielle is getting at, is that if it's privately owned and operated, maybe it's on town land, but we leased it, we're really not going to have a say. And I think that's what you're trying to get at, right? Is that, and I think we can't answer that question specifically because it's a little presumptuous of where this is going to turn out. If we're going to go down an RFP route to develop on our land and have it stay that way, if we're going to just decide, no, the town wants a big sports complex, let's sell it off to the first person who can do it right and has the money to do so. I don't know of any developers in Yarmouth or anybody with the pockets personally who wants to do this right now and is ready to take this on. But I don't think that we can answer, or I think that's why we have so many questions, is because we truly don't know where this is going to go.
If the town were selling it, would it still need to go through the RFP process? Would still have to go through some sort of procurement?
It would.
Yes.
Yes, exactly the same.
Yeah.
as-
16.
Same as the housing
But
disposition. It's
and
all
yes,
real
I think,
estate.
like, yes, Alexis, we would definitely have some say in the RFP of what it would look like, but I think once you get down to the operations of it, a developer may come in and say, I don't want to give it to the rec kids. I don't want the seniors to have a walking path. So, like, either they wouldn't be a competitive bidder or what, but I think there's, like, a lot of unknowns out there for us because we truly don't have answers to a lot of these questions.
You don't award them the bid.
If I may, you can write a development agreement. I was negotiating, thank you. A hockey rink, and they were willing to give up locker room space and time to the local high school and skating for locals at a reduced rate. You just write it into the development agreement.
Okay, then I guess my question is for Paul. The two that you mentioned, are they on town land that was sold, or are they privately developed and invested in?
Both private.
So that's what Danielle is getting at, is that to do this right, it needs to be fully privately developed with this team of senior vice presidents of operations and sports trainers and all of that. And I think that's what we're getting at, is that we don't know that.
If I may, one of the things you might want to look at is, what are your objectives for the performance of the site economically? So what ripple impact do you want? So people have been talking about putting restaurants and other things in the site. Well, that might work well in Fitchburg where there aren't a lot of them around, but do you really want to compete with your own economy? So you don't want to create a scenario where people go to the site. I forget what the Great Wolf Lodge, everything is internal. You stay there, you get the restaurants there, and the economy makes nothing other than the gas to get there. So you got to watch out for creating an economic environment that doesn't create the ripple impact for the hotels and for the restaurants and jobs for service employees or whatever. So I think it's important to think about this externally as much as you think of it internally. And then how it works out for the town, I mean, there's a lot of good ideas, like I know in a town I worked in, we had 2 malls, and we arranged the seniors would come in before they opened and walk around, and, but I think that you can write all that into a development agreement. If we own the land, you put out an RFP, and then it'd be a development agreement in it, which you talk about those things before you put out the RFP, so that the town knows what they're eventually getting.
Yeah, the other option is for the town to put out a long-term lease that would justify the capital investment in the property, would take some of the land costs out of development, make it more attractive to do, and then the town would ultimately still control and own the property, and that would give them the room to negotiate field space and recreational activity.
The thing you gotta watch out for, though, is you don't, sorry.
I take it.
We do have a time limit. I just want to note that we need to be out of here by 6:45, so.
Only one, sorry. You want to make taxes off this, so the lease, you don't get the property tax, you will get the building tax.
So Courtney, do you, of the scenarios, or if you want to kind of tweak a scenario, what would your preference be?
Yeah, I mean, with 2, I think a smaller event space, I don't need a Mass Mutual Center. I need like a secondary version of Katuitt Center for the Arts with a small enough stage. We have the Melody Tent, we have Katuitt, but like somewhere that like, I don't know, we do a lot of special event funding, and we have had people wanting to do concerts in town, but they can't. So like Payomet has done very small ones in Thatcher Hall, which has been great, but it'd be nice to have like the next level up from that in terms of event spaces. And I think when I talk about like community meeting spaces, we have no room to meet for our own committees and like nonprofit groups. I'm not so concerned with like conventions coming in. More so is that our community groups who are already struggling to either rent a space or find a space or go somewhere to have a meeting, have that area. I do like number 3. I think there's an opportunity for like a phased development plan. I just think there's a lot of things that we can't answer. And if I had a crystal ball, I would gladly look in it and tell you all what would be the best thing for Yarmouth, but I don't know. I'd also just like to comment on Mr. Vieira's point about the sea camps. That also included 2 years of heavy public engagement. We have done this in less than a year with very minimal public engagement. So I also share your concerns that it may, no matter what we decide, be what the people want, because we haven't really asked them. So I'm thankful to people who've shown up to these meetings who know about them and who do participate, but I am concerned that we have not heard from the greater audience. There is a neighborhood area over on that road, so we do have some housing already, but it's not a walkable village. But yeah, I think, 2 or 3 or some combo. I think at an earlier meeting, I'd expressed interest in doing the municipal building shuffle and getting a nice community center, and that got kind of shut down because we couldn't talk about what was going on down the line with municipal buildings. But I think that there's an opportunity, like I look at Eastham, and they have that tea time parcel that they're going to develop into a mixed village that's like got a community center and housing and fields and space. But I guess to answer your question, and because we're due on time, some combo of 2 or 3 would be fine.
So for the examples that we put in the scenario 3, some of them were examples of like elements that people were talking about in it, like smaller performance spaces and cultural centers. And so, for example, like the 204 Cultural Arts Center in Harwich, which was a school. And what I don't know is if, so that is town-owned and operated. I don't know if, in addition to, renting out art studios and whatnot, if the town uses it for like municipal meeting space. But, so, it sounds like a meeting space that is not, necessarily trade center large, but enough to meet the existing needs of the community for meeting and performance venues. And then when you say a mix of 3 and 2, do you have any thoughts on for the other uses on it? Residential or other types of commercial?
It'd be nice to have some residential if it could work. I think housing is a huge priority for us, and I think it'd be a very big miss if we don't do anything with housing on this. I think we might hear some contention on that, but and then I think some like small retail if it's available, but yeah, I don't really know. It's hard for me to envision any of this right now.
Okay.
on this plot.
Okay, no, I understand. Yeah, and the housing team, I think when they were looking at examples of, projects that met the unit count they were looking for, it amounted to, 6, 7 acres. I mean, it was not a huge, portion of the site. And I think that was, they intentionally talked about to leave other parts of the site for some of these other uses. So, okay. If you think of anything else, just feel free to chime in as others go around, but thank you. Holly?
So I was in agreement with the scenario number 2, and that's because being a hotel manager in the off seasons, meaning the spring and the fall, school vacation week could have been a prime time for a sports tournament here in Yarmouth that could have put heads in beds and lots of people in restaurants. So for me, in thinking through it, I guess I thought the question I would ask would be, if it was a private developer, and Bill kind of answered that, where could you put stipulations in that the town could either accrue the revenue through rental or develop something that would be useful for both, private and community and local. So I'm all for, and I'm also all for having some sort of community center that can be utilized in the wintertime for either events and or for just community service. I think it was Alan Delaney had said one time that raising your kids in Yarmouth is kind of tough when you don't have, besides, Flax Pond in the summertime, you don't have a lot of areas or community stuff that you can do with your families, kids and families. So for me, the scenario 2 would fit both those bills if that was the way to develop it. And again, we've made strides to make the Cape more year-round with the off-seasons being, no longer just Memorial Day to Labor Day, so those other months need some business, and I think that this might fit that plan as well, so.
Okay.
And I don't know to what scale.
Well, I have an idea that's percolating the scale. So, David?
Yeah, so the one that has the most appeal for me is number 2. And as I think about this, I'm looking through it through the lens of our local businesses and what would benefit them the most. And as we're talking about a sports complex, we haven't really discussed the details, but if you think about it, we're really talking about fall, winter, and spring when that would be used the most, right? Basketball, soccer, those indoor sports that would take place. And so the idea of having options to bring people into the community is the key driver for me. So that's number 2. A couple of things I know people have mentioned off and on, the idea of tournaments. I just want to remind everyone, this goes beyond tournaments. There's a need and a demand that would be 7 days a week for practice use and practice fields. So we're not talking about a facility that's going to hold tournaments Saturday and Sunday and then sit empty. It'll be used throughout the week by local community members, not only Yarmouth, but throughout the Cape. And I know that for a fact because there's the soccer club here in town that has over 400 kids that live on the Cape that participate, and they need space. So there's that. And they do pay, by the way. We're not looking for free fields. That'll be paid for. As far as option 3, the mixed use, 2 things there. Number one, in today's economy, I worry about brick and mortar and retail and what the future really holds and where that's going to go. But more importantly, number 2 is what Bill brought up. I'm not sure I want people coming in and then just staying at this location. We have businesses right up the road. I want them going out and utilizing those businesses. So I know some of these facilities have things like there's a Dunkin' Donuts in some places have like a bar and restaurant where the parents go and sit while the kids are playing, things like that. I guess I'd be okay with that. But honestly, I prefer to be driving people out onto 28 and to some of the businesses. They're already there. Let's support them. Keep that to a minimum. Housing, on the other hand, there is a need for housing. And whether it's supporting that facility, people working there, or the people who live in town and work in other businesses, they need a place to live. I used to head up a nonprofit here in town. I had a lot of staff that were couch surfing or living at their parents or in their car, believe it or not, coming to work. We need housing. So I wouldn't go for the full-blown mixed use with retail, but considering housing, I think is going to be important.
Okay, thank you. As for the kind of the need for amenities for parents, I mean, I have to tell you, there's a place that I go with my girls where literally the amenity is comfortable couches, like, and that is amazing. You know, it's just having a place to sit and, you know, bring my computer or whatever. So it doesn't even need to necessarily be things that would, you know, take people away from other local businesses, I guess is the point. So because we're coming up on time, the idea that is blossoming in my head is I haven't heard any resistance to the idea of mixed, some of a little bit of this, a little bit of that on the site. And so what it sounds like to me is where it makes sense to talk about the scale is really focusing on the size of the of a sports event meeting space. That might dictate scale on the site. And the remainder of the site that is available for other things, such as, you know, other, you know, municipally owned community spaces or housing or other forms of retail, because it sounds like there's kind of a lot of agreement about, or a lot of willingness to talk about, you know, recreational and athletic facilities that I think are often jointly used for performance spaces and whatnot. If that is where you focus the scale conversation on, what is left on the site can kind of naturally fill in. But that's just a thought as we are coming back around on the other side. Mary?
So I don't think I'm going to say anything new, so I don't want to say too much, but I too lean towards scenario number 2. I love the fact that it could meet the community needs. Instead of our families driving off the Cape and spending money, they would be staying on the Cape and staying right here and helping our own economy. Obviously, the performing arts, the meeting space. David and I spoke earlier. While I love what Longplex is doing, I also would not want to take away from our main thoroughway where our stores are suffering as much as it is now in this economy. So I think the more we could bring people to town and draw them to Route 28 would definitely be a benefit. So when I think about the scale, I think about moderate because I would really want to see some housing probably eventually be put there. When you think about how many people would be employed there, where are they going to live? So I think there's a good case to, think about residential being built into it eventually.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, in the name of time, too, I'm with number 2, kind of for the same reasons everybody else has already mentioned. I think we have to allow, in terms of scale, I would be happy assuming the maximum on the housing, at least for the area, because there's tons of space. The only additional thing that I would want to add is, do we need outdoor fields and what the recreation says? Because I like outdoor soccer. I like outdoor lacrosse, and it's a nice place. And I don't even mind bubbles if we have to have them. But it's kind of a combination. So I guess I'm more of a combination 1 and 2, because 2 didn't talk about the outdoor complex.
Thank you. Mike.
So I'm Mike Barry. I represent senior softball, but also representing active seniors. Scenario 2 best fits our interests and needs. When we talk scale, though, if you're kind of going to target tournaments, you need 2 or more fields of everything. These can be multi-use fields, but you would need 2 baseball fields that can also play Little League, that can also play softball, that can also do soccer in the outfield. But you need multiple fields to get this kind of economic impact that I think we all are looking for. That takes space.
Outdoor fields.
Outdoor fields. But the same thing with the indoor. You need an event space that is manageable, fungible, changeable, so that you can do, your tournaments of indoor soccer one weekend. You can do some indoor baseball, perhaps, at least infield maybe. You can do events. You just need that flexibility. And whether it's natural turf or, man-made something, it doesn't really matter too much except for when it comes to, taking care of them over the long term. But yeah, so whether it's pickleball, you need multiple courts. Tennis, the same thing.
Right.
Lacrosse and soccer can be played on the same fields if they're multi-use. You need a lot of space.
Okay. Thank you. Joe?
Hi.
Hi.
I don't have a whole lot to add. Two seems to be the winner.
Oh, pass your.
Fantastic. I don't have a lot to add. I think two seems to be the winner. The one thing I'm thinking about is more along the lines of this RFP conversation that's been sort of percolating around this discussion. And I do agree that an RFP can be written any way we want it to be written. One of the problems with that is that as soon as we start hanging ornaments on the Christmas tree and telling developers what we want and prioritizing certain scenarios over others, we're limiting the pool of respondents dramatically, I think. I think what may be a more productive exercise is how do we carve up this property? How do we sell it off? And what order do we release the RFPs in? Do the housing RFPs come out before the sports complex or vice versa? And that I don't necessarily know because it's what I'm just starting to think about now. But I don't think the town is well suited to be the master developer here. And that's just based upon my own anecdotal experience in the town and all of the other projects that we have going on, which are significant. So those are my thoughts.
Okay. Thank you. So I do want to.
Alexis, if I
Yeah,
may.
sure.
Just to sort of remind people of the process, the reason why we went to each committee is to get your specific sort of jurisdictional focus on the site. And so there's housing, there's recreation, economic development, open space, things like that. Once you provide those and they're done and they go to the Mattakees Utilization Committee, they have a scope online, and I'm sure there's going to be even more public meetings than what the scope shows. So you're vetting this internally and instructing the MUC committee, here's what we want to do. The alternative to that is the MUC committee comes up with the ideas and you go to their committee meetings and we hammer it out. It's better that you, as the people that are educated in economic development, just like housing, provide them with the ideas. Then it's a sort of a process of marrying it all and doing that in the public. So the public's going to look at your ideas as this moves forward in context of the other ideas. So I think that's important. And in the RFP is usually not the place you would control it. You would control it with a master development agreement. In the past, I've used tax increment financing agreements that you provide some incentive through tax incentives, and they provide specific sort of public improvements or public access. So there's a whole bunch of tools you can use, but it doesn't happen at this stage, and it doesn't even happen at the MUC stage. Once you decide here's the development, then it's a matter of what are the development components. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you. So what I would like to propose, given that we have just a few minutes left, I do know we did have a time to see if any members of the community had a comment. I think from this group, what I would suggest, and I'll turn it over to the chair, Courtney, and staff to see what you think. But I think it sounds like the crux of the ideas that has quantitatively come up the most is number two, and I think that is where it makes sense to play with the scale a bit, since the proposal to MUC is, the ask is to have a moderate and an elevated scale. And so again, depending on the scale of the facility you're talking about, the outdoor fields, the parking needs, and so on and so forth, that is going to shape how much of the site is left for these other needs and wants that people have raised, such as community spaces and housing, other retail, that sort of thing. So I think from what I have heard, where it makes sense to focus the scale conversation on is the sports facility, and let that shape the other ideas that I've not heard any opposition to necessarily, which is a willingness to have multiple uses on the site. And to your comment, Joe, that is then the whole idea of phasing and when you, how you break up the site, that is in the next process. So, or at least it kind of starts in the next process, because after each team sends their proposals to MUC, MUC is going to be working, again, the scope is on the project page, but they're working with a BSC group, who I believe is also working on your LCP, if I'm correct. And they are doing a multiple months-long process with public meetings and survey and meetings with select board, and it's all laid out what they propose as a scope. But they're taking the input from each of these land use teams and their own work on existing conditions, and I'm not sure what else they're looking at in terms of, market and things like that, but, and they're working with MUC to develop 3 scenarios, and then with the select board narrowing it down to 1. So that is our understanding of what those next steps are, that your feedback and expertise from the community and economic development kind of perspective is the what MUC will be looking at as they work with the consultant to develop really kind of more detailed scenarios that would look at some of those other things like phasing and how much of the site would be used for X versus Y. So is there any opposition to the idea of having the scale in the proposal be focused on the sports complex and allowing that to shape the remaining space? Because I think what the plan is that we take what we've heard again, we draft a written proposal. CEDC might discuss it, at a future meeting. Chamber members, depending on how Mary wants to handle it, might be give written comments. But, we would, of course, ask you to give additional input to make sure that we've heard you correctly. So that's kind of the next step that staff will work with us and you on. But does that all make sense?
Yep.
Okay. We do need to be out of here in 1 minute, I believe.
Yeah, I just don't know that any of, we can talk about scaling, I think that's fine. I don't have any concept or idea or any expertise in this. Like, I'm not a developer, I'm not a land person, I don't know what things should look like. All I can say is I prefer it to be less than 40, but maybe more than 25 based on these squares. But I truly have no concept based in just who I am every day of what this should look like. I can't picture it in my mind of what a sports facility would look like there. I haven't visited enough. I haven't had the opportunity to tour any others to be given an insight into what they might look like. So I personally don't feel like I can commit, give anything to this conversation because I'm just not that person. I literally would not know what it would look like. And I'm reading the scope of work for BSC Group, and it seems like things are a little all over the place with what we're doing and what they're supposed to do, and that they might be redoing this process again in a few months anyway. So I don't know, because some of their stuff is going to be to show us these configurations and what it would look like. But I personally don't know. So if anybody has any ideas in terms of scale, I think we should talk about that quickly, but I do want to give time for any public that's here. And I know we're on a tight timeline. I personally would prefer to hear from the public than dive any deeper into this, because I think we are in a good consensus on idea number 2 with some other development, but I will see what people think and feel.
Alexis, do you have any ideas?
I mean,
For how to distinguish, the only thing that I can think of is, large, you know, a more moderate is really just the sports complex. And a larger one would be the sports complex with the event space.
So I think what we would do.
And/or the fields.
Yeah, is we might look to pull together some more examples of really truly different scales to give a sense of, you know, so that the memo can give you more of a sense of how, you know, how big are these sites, what do they contain inside, outside, and so on. And, you know, again, understanding that however much of the site that takes up allows for some of the other uses that you've talked about to be accommodated on the site. So I would not be equipped to answer that right now. I think we need to pull some more examples at a bigger range of size. And I think that's what we'll do for the written memo.
One of the ways you can approach these centers is the crowd that it draws. So a large tournament center drawing from, in the facility I talked about earlier, they were looking at a New England-wide hockey center, and actually more than that. And that turned out to be a 500,000 square foot, 6-rink, 3,500 seat stadium type of place. So you could do a regional one, which Mr. Botting is talking about, getting people in the region and the immediate Cape, or you could do one that draws people from the up and down the coast. I remember they used to do soccer tournaments that people would come from Pennsylvania and everything. That will determine your size. So which audience do you want? And then that drives the size of the facility. And the audience also drives how much money you make off the ripple impact.
I think it's also a function of the audience that's willing to come here during what time of the year for what sport. Traffic, costs, congestion, so I think that's a factor too. And the interviews of what's the best use could be the parents. My 3 boys are in their 20s now, so I'm done with this, but I've been in every rink in Massachusetts, so talking to the people that need to live a big part of their life in these facilities is important.
You know, we're in a short time here, but does it make sense to have several different layouts, you know, put out on paper so that we can seize the scope of some of them?
So that sort of detail is really more for the next process with
Right.
MUC and BSC. I mean, I know it feels a little frustrating for it to be so general and vague, but that is kind of where the process is right now, with the idea that hearing the things that the community and people with different, you know, experience and expertise with topics such as economic development and housing and open space, all of that then gets kind of, you know, heard and processed by MUC, who I don't envy them because it's a lot to, you know, pull together and listen to, and working with BSC, who's really scoped to do a lot of that, you know, kind of visualization for different scenarios, and that kind of that piece that I think will help decision making.
So I guess my question then is it suffice for us to bring our scenario to the MUC just to be a sports and event center and let them do the work from there? Like, is that good enough, or is that not
Fine with that, are you fine?
enough?
I mean, once
Do you need a size?
the recreation is, had the same,
He's getting her steps in.
Thank God Kathy's here.
The recreation had a similar scenario, a moderate and an elevated. Theirs was, I believe, more moderate, more in tune with the community. So they wanted the regional facility and then the community one. So they're one step down from what you've been talking about. And then you build the rest from benchmarking. So there's a lot of benchmarking that Alexis' team has already done. There's some benchmarking, I think, that's been done by the recreation people. And so, and what Paul had indicated, there's a facility that has success having certain, you know, size and components. That's really what you can do to hand to MUC,
Right.
saying, here's our 2 facilities, moderate and elevated, and here's some of the components we believe. Now, when you get a developer, the end result will be, you might just say it has to be X number of square feet or reasonably, and the developer is going to determine There was one facility that I saw as benchmarking, there were 12 or 20 basketball courts, which are also volleyball courts, which are also pickleball courts, which is also a trade show. And they ran tournaments across all of those types of uses. So it became a box that entertained multiple alternatives. So really, what do you think is necessary for the town? And it's not about the building configuration, and then what do you think? You have 3,500 rooms that you want to fill as much year-round as possible. So if you have tournaments with 2,000, then that's a pretty good off-season, impact. So I think from the economic perspective, you're thinking about those sort of interrelationships between the facility and everything else in your economy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's enough information to be able to say that this sports facility at, moderate scale, elevated scale, and understanding then how much of the site would be left, I think is what the write-up would focus on.
I'm also reading your write-up from the recreation, and it's literally what we're talking about.
Oh, I didn't do recreation, but I saw.
Well,
I
it's
did,
what we're
yeah,
talking about.
right.
It's the exact same thing, and it even says in here, very similar to the economic development thing. So if they've already done some of this work and we are at our final meeting, very short on time, I think we say our one idea is a sports tourism and event complex of some sort, and then I don't want to duplicate our efforts and theirs and then have BSC have to narrow down their ideas, and they're on the website, they can be looked at, but it's exactly what we're talking about. Elevated 100,000 to 200,000 square feet, somewhere between a regional and tournament facility, outdoor, indoor fields, indoor courts with multi-use space, coordinate with the town, winter and off-season, prioritize access for the town. And then the smaller one is just like a community level facility. So I think just for the sake of time, if everybody's okay with it, that we present our idea as number 2.
But do you want it to talk about the other uses on the site? That not with any specificity, but multiple people talked about combining 3 and 2.
I think then we say that number 2, which was like a sports complex with event and performance space with the option for housing and other facilities. But then I think we're just getting into number 3.
Exactly.
Then we're just number 3.
Three is
So
more.
How you doing everything?
That's why I'm just trying. Well, no, you can do everything.
3 is more of a
You can do
village
everything. It's
center.
being done other places. It's just a matter of, for the purpose of this meeting, our goal was to take our 3 ideas and present 1 to the muck. So I'm trying, okay, I'm seeing a 2. Anybody else want to throw a hand up? Just, we literally, unless we have to schedule another meeting, we are out of time, unfortunately. And I'm just trying to keep you on track, keep us on track. We haven't given any time to the audience yet. I just feel like we're kind of getting a little bit waylaid with some of the comments from Mr. Scott and everybody. So what recreation has put out there is good, but I think in terms of time, I don't know. It's either going to be number 2 or number 3 or a combination that has the opportunity for both. But we're just going to keep spinning our wheels here, which is what we did the last 2 meetings to come up with these 3. And I think what we're talking about is, I took the notes too, and it seems like most people want option number 2 with the availability of housing.
Right. So, and that's, I think, where the scale would come in.
And which is fine, but I can't talk about
Well, that's fine.
scale.
That's fine.
I don't know
We're
what it
going
would
to do
look
some more
like.
benchmarking.
What if we framed it where we come up with the size of number 2 and the rest of the available land is used for housing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fine. Yeah.
That seems to be what everyone's.
Yeah, that's exactly perfect. Yeah.
In part, some of that is determined by what happens to ME Small.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Right. Just before we do, is there anybody online or in the audience who has a public comment? I appreciate your waiting. If you're online, you can raise your hand. Anybody in the audience? Okay, thank you for attending. Is there anything else for the good of the group? So this is our final together meeting. Sounds like we'll be informed of other Mattakese Utilization Committee meetings. The website is up to date. I want to personally say thank you to Alexis and Fiona and the Barrett Planning Group for getting us through this. I don't know if we could have done it without you, honestly. I think we would have all lived in Town Hall for the next month and a half. So thank you. I want to thank Karen and Mary and the Community Development team and all of our members from the Chamber who joined us. It's been really nice to see your faces and get to know you guys and hear your input, so thank you for that. If there's nothing else.
Motion to adjourn.
All right, second, and so moved. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.
Good job, Courtney.